we will do our conclusion on the subject of dreams now. And as I say, because we have tried to pick up the where we left off in last February, where we were continuing with the interrupted talk, it has been a little bit sketchy and all that sort of thing, and so I will not recapitulate in order not to bore you, but let us say we have come to the conclusion that dreams have apparently always been of great interest to humans, and that at certain times in human history some quite insightful material has come forth from various authors concerning dreams, and one of these, which we recommend primarily because the book has just been published a short time ago, is called An Ancient Dream Manual, which is a commentary and a partial translation of the Greek philosopher Artemidorus, his work, The Interpretation of Dreams. And very, very quickly, just going through the main outline, let us say, which this of course has been known, that Artemidorus also classified dreams according to their subject matter, and we went through most of those, so I'm not going to repeat except their names. The simple dream, which is of events as they occurred in the previous days prior to the night when the dream was dreamt. The wish fulfillment dream, which of course was greatly championed by that champion cigar smoker and psychologist Sigmund Freud, who, while I am not a Freudian, I had a lot of occasion to study Freud for professional reasons, and I came to the conclusion he was really quite a nice guy. He really was. That's the wish fulfillment dream. Then the nightmare, which is not a dream about a horse at night, female horse, a mare, but which is a frightening, terrifying dream. And then what Artemidorus called by another name, but which we have called the true dream, wherein from a supernal source, according to Artemidorus himself, various things are revealed, and also often a lot of what nowadays we would call parapsychological data, wherein people dream about events and places in a distant location or distant from them in time at the time of the dream, and then subsequently the dream is proven to have been factually true. This is much more frequent than we imagine, and has always been present. And then finally, what Artemidorus called an oracle, which he called a revelation of God or a God. This is what the Jungians often at the present time call a big dream. Now, in order to place all of this into a good framework, it will be useful for us to try to survey the how should I put it? Survey the map of the mind, at least as it has been explored and as it has been described in what would seem to be a fairly accurate way. and then see how the dream and various dreams fit into that map in terms of their origin and their manifestation to individual humans. So as Shakespeare so beautifully stated, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with sleep. Indicating in his own words that, let's say, the altered state of consciousness, the consciousness that moves away from extroverted wakefulness into other areas of the mind, is very important and very helpful. And since our discussions here concerning dreams involve in many ways the picture of the, whatever you want to call it, probably a good word has been coined by the psychologist, although it's of course a legitimate Greek word, Psyche, which means soul, to call to our mind a sort of soul map that may be of great use. The principal source for this psychotopography, which would be an interesting word if it existed, obviously I base on the work of C.G. Jung. So when doing this, we may wish to remember that these categories, divisions, whatever we wish to call them, these divisions are not sort of hard and fast constituting portions of the psyche, but that like all of these matters, they can help us to orient ourselves in matters of the psyche with a greater degree of adroit understanding than we would otherwise possess. So no statements about the human mind, the human psyche, the human soul, whatever you want to call it in this case, no statements about that should be taken in a hard and fast dogmatic fashion. Why? Because what you are dealing with is not a terrain that leads itself to that kind of hard and fast treatment. And certainly the early depth psychology, particularly, let's say, with Sigmund Freud and his disciples and others, often made the mistake of being very concrete in its descriptions of the various portions of the psyche, all too concrete. Yet these kinds of this kind of soul topography can be helpful in understanding, in our case, in understanding what appear to be the principal sources from whence various dreams arise. Because if we are at all aware of some of our dreams, or have been in the past, because you know in your lifetime your dream recall changes. You know, children, on the whole, especially if they are not discouraged from doing so, have doggone good dream recall, and often later in life also. I would say when I was in my 20s and in my 30s, clear into my 40s, I had a tremendous number of dreams and I remembered a lot of them. However, as time goes on, that inclination may decline, although it can be cultivated and can be recalled. And I might as well throw that in here very quickly. the simplest way of stimulating your dreams, in my experience, and after all, I only have my experience, I don't have anybody else's, and fortunately they don't have mine. Fortunate for them. But let's say, is that you want to have some more dreams. So when you lie down to sleep, kind of withdraw your attention for external sources. If you have been watching television or so, then maybe you wait about 20 minutes before you do this, so that you get away from all external stimuli, and then you tell yourself, I want to dream. I want to have a good, meaningful dream, and I am waiting for it. And so, you don't address this to any one particular person, but I am desirous of having such a dream. And if you keep this up for some nights, the likelihood is very great that you are going to have an increasing number of meaningful dreams. But again, it's something that has to have an accompanying milieu, so to say. You should not be interrupted while you are making these intention statements. You should not be interrupted by the telephone. You should not be interrupted by other people who may be around. Maybe not even by your pet dog or cat, who have often an uncanny proclivity to get up on your bed and to intrude into everything, including your dreams. But if you do that and you really exclude everything else, I would say in most instances you will be able to have stimulated your dream. Now, we already mentioned this, that there are two basic, let's say, topographical divisions of the mind, of the psyche. These in German, the early depth psychologists called das Bewusste and das Unbewusste, the conscious and the unconscious, which are, interestingly enough, both of these words are derived from the German word wissen, which means knowing. So the known and the unknown. There is a part of our minds that is very accessible and that is known to us, at least to a considerable extent. The other one is unknown. Now, that doesn't mean we can't make deductions about it, we can't have experiences of it, but they are a different kind of experience from ordinary, mundane experience. So that which is subject to aware, conscious cognition, and that which is not. So one could say that both of these, the conscious and the unconscious, in turn can be divided in at least two parts, a personal and what has been called a collective part. The term collective isn't all that fortunate a term, but nobody has come up with a better one yet in this regard. So let's say, first of all, we have personal unconscious, that which is unique to an individual psyche, but is not in the forefront of conscious awareness. It's yours, but you don't have constant access to it, although generally it is accessible to you. This unconscious content is manifold, shall we say. A certain part of it was once in our aware consciousness. We're talking about the personal unconscious. It was a time when it was there. But time went on, other experiences came, maybe other dreams came and so forth, and it has been driven out of consciousness awareness, of conscious awareness. It is now in a kind of a twilight zone where it is not accessible to it readily. And often the reason for this forgetting of elements in your personal unconscious are due to the fact that to remember them would be painful. The pleasure principle, as Freud called it, is a very powerful one in all of our lives. We like to have pleasant experiences, and we dislike having unpleasant experiences. And we do all kinds of things to bring that about, although sometimes this endeavor of ours meets with difficulty. And what happens here is that I have, as we all do, I have unpleasant experiences about the past, so I push them out of the way. I don't want to remember that, because it hurts. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And do that a few times, and then you have forgotten. This was, of course, this personal unconscious. This was really the hunting ground of Dr. Freud, and because he, by way of hypnosis initially, and then by way of dream interpretation, he gained access to people's personal unconscious, and found all kinds of elements there that were important. But now we have what C.G. Jung came to deal with more extensively, and that has been named, as I say, it's not a very good name, but we haven't got a better one, collective unconscious. And now the content of the so-called collective unconscious has an apparently universal structure in humankind. Now this doesn't mean that all or most of your deeper collective unconscious you have in common with everybody, but that there are forces there in the psyche which make for a certain similarity, a certain commonality. And that's helpful, certainly, in order to interpret the dreams arising from the collective unconscious. As I say, this was strictly the result of the discovery of C.G. Jung. It has also been called by some Jungian psychologists, especially the late and certainly great, he was an astonishing, unusual man, Dr. Edward Edinger, who in the latter part of his life lived here in Los Angeles, wrote a tremendous number of books, and who was a singularly insightful man. I had the good fortune of listening to lectures of his, have a lot of his books, and I think that maybe next to C.G. Jung himself, Edinger was one of the most successful psychonauts of the modern era. Now, here we are now with the unconscious psyche and even what has been called the collective unconscious psyche. Finally, there is the collective unconscious, which I just mentioned. The content of this is made up, for the most part, at least in manifest form. This is very difficult to explain. It is made up of the cultural world of shared values and forms of humanity. And that is why it has been named a collective. For instance, in our culture we are aware that we ought, at least we used to be, that we ought not to steal, or along more radical lines that we ought not to murder. These are collective values of our culture, and we are, or at least we should be aware of them, although as the culture changes, as all kinds of events happen, times may come when it becomes more and more difficult to remember these values, but we have them in common. I use that as an analogy. Just as we have a certain value system in common, although it may be in jeopardy at the present time in many times, just as we have that in common, we have forces of the psyche, images of the psyche in common with each other. And not only at any one given time, but across the time track. We have archetypal, and I'll come to that in a minute, imagery, collective unconscious imagery in common with the Greeks. We have it in common with the Egyptians. If you want to go very far, we have it in common with the Bushmen of Australia. Why? Because we're human. And that's why Jung likened it, because he didn't find really any other analog for it. It's somewhat like instinct. We all have an instinct to nourish ourselves, whether we are Bushmen or whether we are ancient Greeks or contemporary Americans, and other instincts. We have all those in common. And so at a much, much deeper level, we have, again, certain data and certain proclivities, and in as much as our mind works in images, also certain images which we have in common. That is why some forms of literature, for instance, obviously not everything, some forms of art which draw on the collective unconscious, which have that content and that power, will be meaningful through the ages. We can read about, let's say, the Arthurian myth, or the Grail myth, or the Greek myths, for that matter, and they are meaningful to us. How can that be? Because they come from an area of the mind which we have in common, no matter what century, no matter what millennium it comes from, or what culture or nation. Now then, the general structures of the collective unconscious are two in number. There are two kinds of forms that we find there, and they are let me see, I had them right here, but in any event, they are archetypes and complexes, as they were called. The complex is a less enduring and less powerful constellation, which nevertheless has quite a bit of influence on the psyche of the individual. And it comes from the collective. And Jung was actually the first one to bring forth teachings about complexes. And the archetype is at an even deeper level, and I'll come to it in a minute. on the border, so to say, on the borderland, as it were, of the personal and the collective unconscious, is the duality of the two. They can either be called the first two archetypes that we encounter, or let's say semi-archetypes that are called the anima and the animus, which also have been called the contrasexual images of the psyche, because they have to do with the psychic identity of the gender of the sex, which is not the one we were born into. Now, I am not going to go into some of the present hullabaloo about sex changes and things of that sort, but I am, I am telling it in the classical Jungian way. So the reason we have enumerated these divisions of the psyche is that all of these manifest in dreams at various times and to various degrees. It is the dream has been called grandiloquently the royal road to the unconscious. And it is on that road that we meet the representatives of these deeper forces of our mind. So we might as well come to that little understood by anybody, including myself, and yet very, very important issue of the deep psyche, what has been called archetypes, or the archetypes. We need to take a little look at what they are and how they may manifest. So Jung always had some little story about how he discovered this issue or that issue. And they are usually, well, I wouldn't accuse dear Dr. Jung of falsifying, but let's say they point to some important truth, but at the same time they should not be taken terribly seriously. It's a funny thing to say. But and so Jung gives us the following account of how he discovered the archetypes. While he was still a young medical psychiatrist, already practicing, or alienists as they called them back in those days, and he worked at a large mental institution in his native Switzerland. He was also on the staff, and there he made the acquaintance of a patient who was simple, uneducated, and in fact illiterate Swiss countryman, and the individual and he were exchanging various stories, and so he was the patient was looking out the window in the building one day, and Jung came up to me and said to him, probably in good Swiss German, Schweizerdeutsch, it's an abominable German. You can know the German of Goethe and Schiller, but you will never know the Swiss German. That's a very different one. In any event, I said, what are you looking at, friend? And the man said something like this, I am looking at the sun. And see, doctor, if you look at it close, the sun has a tail, from that tail come the winds of the four directions. And so Jung registered that, and he says by synchronicity, within a very short period of time after this exchange, Jung got a package. And the package contained a translation, a recent translation of a Mithraic ritual. This is a mystery cult of the late Roman Empire. And as it was translated from, I think, Latin into German. And as he was reading in it, he came across exactly the same description of the sun having a sort of an opening, and that out of that opening come the north wind, the south wind, and the east wind, and which one did I forget? Which direction did I forget? East. Yeah. Okay. And Jung said, well, I have encountered an ancient image coming from an ancient mystery religion in the mind of a simple Swiss man who, on top of it all, is deranged. So this is something important. This is something important. Now, this, of course, is not the origin of the archetypes, not even of Jung's discovery of the archetypes, but it is merely a synchronistic dramatization whereby Jung's already dawning recognition of the existence and the nature of archetypes was brought into the light of his conscious recognition. So Jung introduced the term archetype in 1919 in an essay, Instinct and the Unconscious. I mentioned to you before the similarity with instinct. He freely admitted that he had taken the term, as well as at least to some extent the concept, not from what some people may call empirical psychology, but rather from something else, namely from his favorite sources, namely the visionaries, the Gnostics, the mystics, the magicians of the early centuries. He said that some of his sources for the concept of the archetype were the collection of writings often referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum, the great work of Hermetic philosophy, a whole bunch of books which were discovered only at the time of the Renaissance and created quite a stir. These are peculiar things that happen in history, that whole libraries that pertain to some philosophical or often mystical religious orientation will be lost for centuries. And then all of a sudden, seemingly fortuitously, they are discovered. And that is what happened in the Renaissance era with the books of Hermes, and that is what happened in our own time with the Nag Hammadi Gnostic library, which was discovered in Upper Egypt. In the Corpus Hermeticum, in the Hermetic writings, the divine is called, among other names, the archetypal light. The archetypal light. And the Christian Gnostics, as quoted by Irenaeus, he says that the Gnostics said to have thought that, and here is the translated quotation, the creator of this world did not fashion these things directly from himself, but copied them from archetypes outside of himself. Now, how that is to be interpreted Gnostically, we don't have the time to go into. Another source acknowledged by Jung as a source of his concept of archetypes is the famous early Christian mystical treatise of Neoplatonic and Gnostic derivation called the Treatise of the Divine Names by a mysterious person called Dionysius the Areopagite, a mysterious Greek mystic, and where also you might say the concept of the archetypes appears, and we find it in various places. But what still let's try to come a little bit closer to it. What is this ancient idea of the archetypes as stated by Jung? From the ancient Gnostic, Hermetic, and Neoplatonic point of view, as the Greeks would call it, the types and images are the significations of the various ways in which the ultimate divine power of deity, of the aletes theos, the true God, as the Bruce Codex called them, manifest. So images, names, impressions, seals, which are present in these ancient books are all of archetypal derivation from a central, transcendental, and unapproachable point, which is the source of all things. There come forth many emanations of power and of light. The Greek word for power, dynamis, has been used. As these emanations descend to the lower levels approaching human consciousness, they manifest in, as they were called, types and images of various sorts. So maybe in a more modern metaphor we might say that there are energies that come forth from to us unknown sources, way back deeply in reality. And as these energies come closer to our own consciousness, they appear in images and in sometimes figures that is like an animated image, like in the Eastern Orthodoxy, the icons have been called windows into heaven. In the same way, we might say that they are windows into heaven because they depict archetypal images. And these images come to us in dream, in vision, in various ways. Now, let us compare that which might be called, let's put together a summarization of Jung's teachings regarding archetypes. The archetypes are, now this is a definition of mine, but quite compatible with Jung's, that the archetypes are agencies whereby an ineffable, although everywhere present psychic energy manifests. The ever dark, forever unmanifest central essence of the collective unconscious, as he called it, radiates forth a psychic energy which nourishes the entire psyche and the psyches of many people, and which moves it toward its own fulfillment, its own individuation. Because this is what we need to remember, that Jung's, how should we put it, Jung's depiction of the dynamics of the psyche is not with, is does not depict a psyche without purpose. Our psyches, both collectively and individually, are trying to do something. And what they are trying to do is not some kind of worldly objective to make money, to have a lot of friends, to whatever, have a lot of cars or something like that, but rather the psyches of humanity are trying to accomplish a task, which is an individual task. And here has been always a lot of problem, because we have a tendency to try to transmogrify these individual tasks into something general. And that's usually a mistake. And the individual task is that somehow the human, as the human finds himself here on earth, is lacking in wholeness. We can have a lot of talents, we can have a lot of amazing things, but we are not complete, we are not whole. And every once in a while, when we are in a very contemplative mode or so, we realize that, oh dear, there's something missing in me. And now it is this missing part, or the portion that is missing in the human psyche, that the higher forces are trying to remedy and to bring about. So we are engaged in a process of becoming whole. But it's very time-consuming and very difficult, and much of the times, at least in one lifetime, it doesn't succeed, which is perhaps one of the reasons why a very large portion of humanity and in the East has adopted the teaching of reincarnation. Because, heck, you can't do all of this in one lifetime. It's just not enough time, not enough opportunity, so that we got to have more time, okay? That's all there is to it. Well, yeah, I can see that. Now then, let's take a look at the images a little bit that work for this wholeness and that come to us and try to move us in that direction. As I mentioned before, there are the anima and the animus, the so-called contrasexual images, which show themselves in a variety of ways in dreams, because after all, that's what we are talking about. Now, for instance, romantic dreams of members of the opposite sex. And I take it that we all had them in one way or the other. They indicate the longing for and the need to unite the opposites in the psyche. These dreams indicate that they indicate the need to enlarge our conscious sphere, include more in it than we may be predisposed to including. The consciousness of the ego, the outer self, is without that element. So the dreams we are dreaming in this context are most frequently romantic, not necessarily erotic, and I'm sure you know the difference. One has to do primarily with feeling. So the dreams we are, the less one dreams of a particular person known to one, and the more of the impersonal or unknown romantic figure, the greater the likelihood that the anima or the animus are internalizing or integrating. Because these images, so we might see that we all have within us a psychic man or a psychic woman, and they are trying to get together. And because of whatever may be going on, they can't really do that terribly well in our conscious life, so they'll do it in our dreams. Now, let's say other images that where this issue is likely to come up. For instance, dreams of menacing figures of the opposite sex, frequently in a malign context. And what this is, according to Jungian psychology, these sorts of anxiety dreams often indicate the anxiety that our present ego self experiences versus the contrasexual image. So let's say the psyche of the masculine psyche is apprehensive of the feminine psyche. I'm an old fellow with has experienced many things, seen many things, but I fully admit with my life experience that women are scary. You know, the women are frightening creatures to a man. Maybe not to themselves or to dogs or to cats, but the similar situation on the other side. There is in the attempt to understand and to assimilate, there is fear. And this is present, and the only way Jung says that it is overcome is by consciousness. Consciousness that becomes accepting and eventually incorporates at least important elements of the contrasexual image. Where do you find a lot of that? In alchemy. Jung wrote 5 full books about alchemy. He wrote more of course, I mean, it was in a psychological context, but it has been said he wrote more about alchemy than about psychology. But of course, the two were the same. And in alchemy, the great process is, of course, the two elements, the king and the queen, also symbolizes the sun and the moon and the salt and sulfur, trying to get together and trying to unite. So dreams on other issue where this comes up are dreams of inadequate reliance on the anima and the animus. Now, dreams which show how one rejects, repulses, runs away from some relatedness, some closeness with at least a psychic representative of the opposite sex. Because this is also true. It can't be done away with. The sexes, the genders are afraid of each other. Just like I say, women are scary, and men are scary to women. And so that is an issue certainly to overcome. On the other hand, we also have the opposites, the dreams of excessive reliance on anima or animus. Namely, a woman may dream that she is carried downstairs or otherwise pampered unnecessarily by a man, or otherwise a man similarly, or in other words, an unreasonable reliance on the opposite. Now, this much about anima and animus, but this is very important in an archetypal sense, I can't really tell you why, except that I have a feeling that the reason of the great importance, the great power of the anima-animus relationship is because it represents the energy of psychic transformation, as the alchemists, of course, realized. It's energy, it's force that we are dealing with, and therefore it's of very great importance. Now, let's say I have sometimes envisioned or thought about it that when the individuation process takes place and the transformation is sort of beginning to happen, that the archetypes are coming. It's sort of a medieval image, like a great big army. They are coming over the hill, and in front of them is the anima and the animus, an Amazon and a knight. So they are in the forefront of the archetypes. They are the first ones that we meet and that we have to deal with. It doesn't mean we deal with them very successfully. It doesn't mean that then now we are not going to deal with them, but it means they are the first ones. And then there are a whole number of other archetypes. Very quickly to take a look at them, because these are, of course, the active forces in the dreams. The dream of the great mother, which is an archetypal force, and it's not always a motherly figure, but it has things like the earth and caves and womb-like rooms, the ocean, bodies of water. These are, and others, are all the representatives of the Great Mother, the Great Father. And they have nothing to do with our physical mothers and fathers. I have to conclude really soon. And the Great Father, also sometimes called the Heavenly Father, the Sun. What way it appears in dreams, the sun, airy symbols, birds. The eagle was a symbol of Jupiter in ancient Rome, very important one. Sometimes a man with golden hair and beard, flying spears, swords, they all there. Then comes the so-called wise old man, a hierophant, a guru, a master, a teacher, a wizard. Merlin is in the mythology of Britain. Merlin is the paramount figure of the wise old man. The trickster, which is a juggler, a gambler, a magician, a jester, a mercurial facilitator of the process that we are engaged in. That's why you have the Fool of the Tarot card as such an important figure. One of my I shouldn't become one of my most impressive dreams that I can recall offhand of that figure was I dreamt of a man whom I knew and who had died. He was a magician, not of the stage magician variety, but of the other kind, a rather good one, an interesting man. And so here I dreamt of him that I was walking down a path, and there in front of an old-fashioned sort of village house, in front of a great big table that had sort of various objects on it, magical wands and things, stood my old friend who had died. And I walked up to him and said, I exclaimed his name, "Hey, you're alive." And he said, "Stefan, I am much more alive than I ever have been," he said. And that's how we all have to be, and we are going to make it. It was a very, very positive. And I said, well, I think that was a good dream. But again, it was also a trickster magician. the trickster magician who informed me that things are going well. And Archetype of Transformation, which has to do with mandalas. The archetype of the self, which the self to Jung is the center of the psyche and also of the representative of the ultimate deific power that is enthroned in the psyche and that is growing and taking over. And there are many others, there are animals, mythological figures and all that which relate to the archetypes. Now, as our time moves along with us, maybe a little summing up of this is necessary. What all of this indicates is that Freud and Jung and the rest of the depth psychologists were right. They were right in this, that dreams are the royal road from and to the mystery. The mystery that is within us, but is not entirely confined to within us. The only reason that we can have interesting, transformative, whatever you wish to call it, individuational experiences in our lives is because we have the potential, the seed of that within us. It's not something that comes to us from outside. It's not a God who will come here. Here is the gift for you, but it is something that is allowed to be stimulated and to unfold from within. And one of the ways in which that process discloses itself to us and motivates us and reminds us that there is some important process taking place, not just the stuff that comes from the world, not just the politics, not just even a worldwide epidemic, but something really important. And that really important thing cannot really be defined. But certainly one way in which it can be approached is that it's the movement toward wholeness. And by way of that wholeness to an even more transcendental and universal wholeness. The way to transcendence is through the door of immanence. We have to get to that which is within us, and when we get hold of it, then with that we can go everywhere. It's more powerful in terms of taking us to mysterious places than any spaceship. Cape Canaveral is right here inside of us. You see? But in order to become aware of that and to deal with that, we have the dream. The dream reminds us. The dream is there like like someone knocking at the door. Come on. You got something. Something needs to happen. Something's got to be done. You can't stay the dumbbell that you are forever. You really have to. It's time to get going, no matter what time of your life you are in. And were it not for the dream, I would say things would be much more difficult. The dream is a great helper. The dream is a motivator. The dream is a messenger. I've often envisioned the dream as being associated with Hermes, Mercury, who is flying through the air on his winged sandals with his with the wings and carrying his winged staff, because he flies through time, he flies through geographical distance. He does not take any limitation into account, and as such accomplishes what needs to be accomplished. The growth, the transformation, the unfoldment of this curious and yet so extremely important potential that is within us. And so let's not neglect the dream. The dream is still very important. Psychiatry and medical psychology might have moved more and more into the noble professions of pill pushing, but there is no pill that will accomplish our internal reunification, but the dream will, and so we need to pay attention to it. We need to study it, and we need, to the extent that possible, be aware of it and process the dreams as they come to us. Of course, there are various ways in which people have added to it. One of the interesting things that, and it's really quite pertinent, that Jung came up with fairly early also was that you can combine with the dream something that he came to call active imagination. In fact, that's the principal way in which a Jungian lady whom I knew, my late friend Irene Melvin, God rest her soul, said the best way to practice active imagination is if you had a dream and you have a feeling that the dream was not really all that complete, you'd like to go on with it. And you sit down and you evoke the last scene from the dream that you remember. And then you continue with it. And he said, you can really do that? I said, yes, it's not that difficult. So then I tried it, and sure enough. But you have to have a fairly graphic, good dream to work with. And so you can continue with that, and then let's say the additional meaning, the additional mission of the dream begins to disclose itself. So dreams are still very important. They're a great blessing in our lives, and if time comes in your life where you're not dreaming much, you shouldn't be concerned about it. But now and then try to do an exercise whereby you vivify your dream life, and then you will have really dealt with a treasure. It is a treasure there. This is like the gold in the Rhine that Wagner wrote about. This is the great treasure, and that we are led to that treasure, and the treasure is disclosed to us, and we learn how to deal with the treasure by way of the dream. So let's be happy that we have the capacity to dream, and let us exercise that power as much as we can for the good, for our transformation, for the deepening of our consciousness, because that is really all that matters. Or people say, oh well, but you got to transform the world, you got to make a better world. The way you make a better world is by having more consciousness. The way you have a better world is when you become better yourself. Jiddu Krishnamurti, whom it was my pleasure to listen to a number of times, said it quite early in his life, and he repeated it. The world problem, my friends, is the individual problem. And we are an individual, and that problem can be helped by way of the dream. So let's do it. Thank you very much.